The year 1066 is etched deeply into the English imagination. Hastings, Harold, and William the Conqueror are familiar names, tied to a story of ambition, betrayal, and the seismic shift that followed the Norman Conquest. Recently, the BBC series King and Conqueror has attempted to dramatise this defining moment. But how well does it succeed? Is it faithful to the facts of history, or does it distort them for spectacle? And what does the real story of 1066 actually look like when it is stripped of its modern embellishments? King and Conqueror is a series with sweeping ambition. It presents itself as a gritty, dramatic, and character-driven retelling of the rivalry between Harold Godwinson, the last crowned Anglo-Saxon King of England, and William of Normandy, the Duke who would cross the Channel and claim the throne. The show foregrounds personal drama, Harold's conflicted loyalties, William's ruthless ambition, and the political intrigue surrounding the throne of Edward the Confessor. Cinematically, it leans into stark visuals, mud, blood, and candlelit chambers, stylistically reminiscent of Game of Thrones or The Last Kingdom. The music and costuming further attempt to immerse the audience in a dark, quasi-medieval atmosphere that prioritises mood over meticulous accuracy. But the series is hamstrung as it struggles with accuracy. In pursuit of tension and drama, it sometimes strays into outright invention. Characters are given motivations that are not attested in the sources, timelines are compressed, and historical nuance is replaced with melodrama. In particular, the depiction of Harold's time in Normandy and his oath to William, while rooted in medieval claims, is presented in a way that borders on fantasy rather than sober interpretation. The result is a production that feels compelling in the moment but leaves historians and informed viewers unsettled by its creative liberties. Not to mention that it is really, really boring. It's so slow, the characters are unengaging, and the acting is static and cold. When adapting 1066 for the screen, one of the biggest challenges is the scarcity and bias of the sources. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written from an English perspective, is terse and matter-of-fact. The Bayeux Tapestry, meanwhile, is a Norman commission designed to legitimise William's conquest. Later chronicles, such as those of the Orderic Vitalis or William of Poitiers, are written with the benefit of hindsight and often coloured by political agendas. Any retelling must therefore wrestle with competing and sometimes contradictory narratives. King and Conqueror makes a bold choice. It privileges the Norman perspective. Harold's oath to William is treated as a pivotal betrayal, one that seals Harold's fate at Hastings. Yet many historians have questioned whether such an oath took place at all, or whether it was later Norman propaganda designed to cast Harold as a perjurer and justify William's invasion. By dramatising it so vividly, the show effectively endorses one side of a centuries-old debate and risks misleading viewers into treating it as settled fact. The same applies to the representation of Harold's personal life. The series invents romantic entanglements and moral quandaries not found in the historical record. These may make for compelling television, but risk distorting the character of Harold, a man described in sources as pragmatic, pious, and deeply loyal to his kin and kingdom. The blurring of fact and invention creates an image of Harold more akin to a Shakespearean tragic hero then to the historical figure who led England's feud against the Normans. To understand why accuracy matters, we must revisit the real events of that fateful year. Edward the Confessor, King of England from 1042 to 1066, died childless in January. His death left a succession crisis. 3 men emerged as contenders to the throne. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English nobleman, brother-in-law to Edward and chosen by the Witangnemot, the English Council of Nobles, to succeed him. William, Duke of Normandy, who claimed Edward had promised him the throne years earlier and that Harold had sworn to uphold his claim. Harold Hardrada of Norway, a Viking king with dynastic links to earlier Anglo-Scandinavian rulers of England, particularly through his predecessor, King Magnus. In January 1066, Harold was crowned king, supported by the English nobility and clergy. His rule was immediately challenged. In the north, his brother Tostig, who had been exiled after years of misrule as Earl of Northumbria, plotted against him. That September, Harold Hardrada invaded England with Tostig's backing, landing with a formidable Viking army. Harold marched north with astonishing speed and defeated the invaders decisively at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September. The victory was total. Hardrada and Tostig were slain, and the Viking threat extinguished. Chroniclers describe the battlefield as so littered with corpses that it marked the end of the great Viking invasions that had plagued England for centuries. But Harold's triumph was short-lived. Even as he celebrated, William was preparing his invasion across the Channel. His fleet had been delayed by contrary winds, but finally set sail, landing at Pevensey in Sussex on the 28th of September. Harold marched his weary forces south, covering nearly 200 miles in a matter of days, a logistical feat that underscores his determination and leadership. On the 14th of October 1066, the two armies met at Hastings. Harold's forces, composed largely of the Fyrd, levied militia, and his housecarls, professional warriors, took up position on Senlac Hill. They formed a shield wall, a tried and tested Anglo-Saxon tactic. William's army, a mix of Norman cavalry, Breton auxiliaries, and infantry, launched repeated assaults but were repulsed. According to some accounts, a feigned retreat drew parts of the English line into disarray. By afternoon, William's persistence paid off. Harold was killed, whether by an arrow to the eye, a spear, a sword, or any of those remains debated, and the English army collapsed. William pressed on to London and was crowned king on Christmas Day. The Norman Conquest changed England irrevocably. The Anglo-Saxon elite was displaced, their lands confiscated and redistributed to Norman barons. Norman French became the language of power, mingling with Old English to shape the English language we know today. The feudal system reshaped landholding and governance. Castles and cathedrals rose across the land, symbolizing both military might and religious reform. English law, culture, and identity were altered in ways still visible today. The conquest also tied England more closely to continental Europe, entangling it in the politics of France and the papacy for centuries. Beyond politics, the conquest brought deep cultural change. Monastic reform accelerated, art and architecture flourished under Norman influence, and the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy faded into obscurity. For the common people, life often grew harsher with heavier burdens of debt. Taxation and obligations under feudalism. Yet the resilience of English traditions meant that elements of Anglo-Saxon culture endured, blending with Norman innovations to produce a new hybrid identity. While King and Conqueror captures the scale of these events in broad strokes, its handling of the details leaves much to be desired. The show's preference for Norman propaganda undermines the complexity of the period. By simplifying Harold into a tragic oathbreaker and William into a quasi-heroic visionary, it perpetuates myths rather than exploring ambiguities. The reality is far more interesting. Harold was a capable leader whose rapid response to dual invasions demonstrates remarkable skill, while William's victory was as much the product of luck, weather, and timing as of destiny. The series also flattens the political and cultural landscape of pre-conquest England. The vibrancy of Anglo-Saxon society, the richness of its monasteries, the sophistication of its legal system, the depth of its religious life, is largely absent. Instead, England is portrayed as a muddy backdrop awaiting Norman enlightenment. This portrayal misses the fact that 11th century England was one of the wealthiest and most administratively advanced kingdoms in Europe, with a strong coinage system, impressive churches, and flourishing scholarship. More seriously, the BBC's new series claims to tell a true history. Yet even in its opening episode, many details fall apart under scrutiny. There was no civil war nor a peace agreement for the Mercians to break. William and Matilda were not married as early as 1043, the year of Edward's coronation, yet the show presents this as fact. Emma of Normandy did not have a son called Athol. The identity of this invented character is baffling. Nor was Emma the power behind Edward's throne. When Edward gained power, she was deprived of authority and even stripped of her treasure. No one could identify a Mercian sword at a glance, and no warrior would put an expensive bloodied sword straight back into its scabbard. Edward's wife was not called Gunhild, but Edith, the daughter of Godwin. Admittedly, this does avoid confusion with another Edith later in the tale, but the problem will only deepen once Harold himself marries yet another Edith. The historical Morcar was never Earl of Mercia in 1043. His father held the title, which later passed to Morcar's brother, Edwin. Morcar himself was probably not even born at that date, and when he did come of age, he became Earl of Northumbria, not Mercia. There is also no evidence that William attended Edward's coronation, though the programme insists otherwise. Finally, the notorious incident in Dover, which genuinely tarnished the Godwin family, occurred in 1051 and had nothing whatsoever to do with Emma or the Mercians. While King and Conqueror excels in visual drama, it sacrifices historical fidelity. Invention may be inevitable in screen drama, but here it too often substitutes for insight. Romantic subplots crowd out political complexity. Invented characters distort real ones, and the nuances of medieval kingship are reduced to clichés of betrayal and ambition. The result is a story that should entertain, but fails to illuminate, repeating the mistakes of earlier dramatizations that choose myth over history, not to mention the fact that all their armour, all their clothing, all their fashion is brown and grey. Where's the colour? The early medieval period was an incredibly colourful time. You could demonstrate your own wealth, your own prestige, by the colours that you wore. The more colours you wore, the more prestigious you were. The scene should not be of hundreds of men dressed in brown, women in muted colours, but one of an army of colourful men trying to show their status by the colours they wear, and of women dressing their best to impress. Fashion was not so different back then as it is today. We dress our best to look our best, to present ourselves in such a way as to gain respect. It's exactly the same in the Anglo-Saxon period. And then they did it with colour. As historian Annie Whitehead said in her review, Does it matter that they got the history so wrong? In this case, I think it does, because so much is wrong, and especially as it shows the women in such bad light. Emma, irredeemably evil, Matilda, a torturer. There were powerful women at the heart of this story, and they've been done a disservice. Not explaining that key names and/or titles have been changed will make anyone with a desire to learn more struggle to find the real history. In essence, it seems to be a pale imitation of Game of Thrones or The Last Kingdom, and in that alone, it is a wasted opportunity to tackle the subject differently. King and Conqueror reminds us of the enduring fascination of 1066. The Norman Conquest is a story of war, legitimacy, and cultural transformation, ripe for adaptation. Yet the series illustrates the perils of choosing drama over accuracy. For those seeking historical drama, this isn't it. More like anti-historical drama, or historical adjacent drama. For those seeking entertainment, this isn't that either. It's stale, boring, lifeless, and a pale imitation of the greatness of the Vikings show or The Last Kingdom. This is the Game of Thronesification of history in full swing. The real events of 1066 need no embellishment. They are already a tale of kings and conquerors, of fate decided on a battlefield and a nation forever changed. Perhaps future retellings will do more justice to the complexities of that decisive year, bringing us closer to understanding the men and the moment that reshaped England. For now, ignore the show if you can. If you can't, watch it with skepticism. Take it with a vat of salt and with a history book in hand.